InvestorIdeas.com podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corporation, trading on the OTC as CSE, a fully licensed cannabis cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. And Cannabis Swiss products are laboratory tested to ensure the product is standardized, safe, and consistent. And Cannabis Swiss Corp currently sells via distribution network of Swiss retailers and online shops under the retail brand Alpine Cannabis. In today's podcast, is going to be looking at a few private and public company announcements, looking at APHA Incorporated trading on the TSX and the NASDAQ as APHA, looking at Pabst Labs, a newly formed licensed cannabis company out of California, RAMM Pharma Corporation trading on the CSE as RAMM, as well as Medical Marijuana Incorporated trading on the OTC as MJNA. So first starting with APHA Incorporated, who announced it's completed its first certified EU GMP shipment of dried flower from its APHA 1 EU GMP facility to its wholly owned German subsidiary CC Pharma GmbH, a leading distributor of pharmaceutical products to more than 13,000 pharmacies in Germany. Our first EU GMP shipment into Germany represents another significant milestone for APHA Incorporated, one that strengthens our position as a leading cannabis company in Germany and in the European Union, said Erwin D. Simon, the Chief Executive Officer of APHA Incorporated. We're leveraging our strong medical platform and multifaceted German strategy, which combines domestic cultivation, import licenses, and large distribution infrastructure to increase access to high-quality medical cannabis for patients worldwide. We remain excited about future milestones, including the completion of our cultivation facility in Neumünster, Germany, which we expect will be completed in the second quarter of the fiscal year 2021. Now, the German market is considered to be one of the most highly sought-after developed medical cannabis in the world, and APHA's German operations have been preparing for the importation of EU GMP-certified cannabis from Canada, allowing for shipments to CC Pharma in order to leverage CC Pharma's expansive in-country distribution network. So APHA obviously now has their products going into German markets. Again, they're not the only company that's in that space right now from Canadian producers. There's a few others who are also going to be either close behind them or slightly ahead of them. And realistically, this is something I've talked about before when looking at the EU marketplace as a whole, especially when looking at Germany. There's lots of competition starting to enter that space now outside of the Canadian market. Lots of producers from Latin America, lots of producers from Israel, other parts of the world where they have year-long growing conditions, where they have lower cost for labor and production, and also are a little bit closer as far as actual geographical locations to some of these countries, making it easier for import and export. I do think that the EU marketplace, it continues to be the very sought-after market for most of these companies, whether they're Canadian-based or other international companies in the space. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next coming years. Obviously, a lot of these Canadian companies have focused highly on the regulations, but I will say so have most of their competitors. Again, looking at Latin American regulations, they're quite strict. Looking at what's going on in Israel, there's huge high standards there for their cannabis products. So I think that that's something that, when we look at this industry, there's always this discussion of premium and quality, that our product's going to be the best and that's what's going to help us sell. And as much as that's true to some effect, the biggest problem that we're having today is more and more people are getting better and better at this. The production process is only improving. And so I think that to differentiate yourself only on quality, especially when looking at these new entry markets, it's going to be difficult. And I think that eventually what you're going to be competing on is the overall customer perception of your products. So not only the packaging, but the quality, and then also the cost points. And I think that some of those international competitors will probably beat out some of the Canadian producers when it comes to cost points. But I do think as well, some of the trust of the brand that APHA has built up in their international sort of branding will be a benefit for them, at least for German consumers. But it's definitely interesting to see how this is going to pan out over the next sort of year. And I do think that you're going to see more and more products starting to enter into the EU marketplaces as they prepare to sort of build out that marketplace and really launch in the next year or so. Next, looking at Pabst Labs, a newly formed licensed cannabis company who has revealed the initial launch of the Pabst Blue Ribbon cannabis-infused seltzer. Now, the famed Blue Ribbon, synonymous with good times for over 175 years, will now adorn the can of a non-alcoholic THC-infused seltzer developed by Pabst Labs. Now, Pabst Labs was founded by a group of cannabis beverage experts and former Pabst Brewing Company employees who were granted the rights to create a line of cannabis-infused drinks under the Pabst Blue Ribbon name, and Pabst Labs is responsible for the production, marketing, and sales of the new drink. Pabst Blue Ribbon has an incredibly loyal and passionate customer base who are open to change and embracing new ideas. We've spent a long time creating a quality product for both new and experienced users and believe that the entry of an established brand can help kickstart the cannabis drink category, said Mark Fakel, the Pabst Labs brand manager. Now, Pabst Blue Ribbon cannabis-infused seltzers marks a major milestone for the burgeoning cannabis drinks industry and an awesome way for lovers of Pabst Blue Ribbon to experiment with this new kind of buzz. The initial test launch will see the Pabst Blue Ribbon cannabis-infused seltzers available to customers in a select group of California dispensaries and direct to consumers via shop.pabstlabs.com. And Pabst Labs is thrilled to be honored to develop a product that fits into the famed Pabst Blue Ribbon name. And Pabst Blue Ribbon is one of America's most beloved brands, a champion of creativity, community, and lifestyle, and recently has been an innovating brand beer which launches of hard coffee, hard tea, and hard seltzer. Now, each 12-ounce can of Pabst Blue Ribbon cannabis-infused seltzer is made from the highest quality ingredients and serves up a delicious, effervescent lemon-flavored seltzer that contains just 4 grams of sugar, 25 calories, and contains no preservatives, with 5 milligrams of THC per Pabst Blue Ribbon can, has ensured that it offers a responsible dosage designed to make it go to drink for both casual and experienced cannabis users. And the lemon seltzer will be the only flavor available during the initial launch, but additional flavors are already in development. There's going to be a Pabst Blue Ribbon THC infused seltzer coming to the market. I do think that that's very cool that Pabst is actually supporting this and is allowing them to use that name. I do think that that's a bit of a stretch with the comment there that the customer base for Pabst Blue Ribbon are open to change and embracing new ideas. That seems like the opposite of the Pabst Blue Ribbon drinker that I've met. But I do think that it's really exciting that we're now starting to see for the beverage sector, some of these companies actually realize the potential of this market and are jumping or at least dipping their toes into the water. So Pabst Blue Ribbon obviously allowing this Pabst Labs to be formed and to sort of go outside of their brand. But I do think that this is going to be the step towards what's really going to impact the alcohol industry and really boost up the cannabis industry, which is the beverage sector. That's the real long-term potential for this industry, as again, you have to look at habitual use of any sort of drugs, and most people are used to consumption via drinking. So again, for the social side, once these drinks are more available, once the dosage is a little bit more regulated, also once the average consumer is used to the dosage, that's another big thing when we're looking at all of these different beverages coming to the market. I do think that Pabst Blue Ribbon in this case was smart, or Pabst Labs was smart with keeping it at a 5 milligram dosage. I know a lot of people think that's garbage. You shouldn't keep it that low. But the biggest thing is for a lot of people who are coming into this industry, the first thing new consumers of cannabis will probably be looking at is the beverage sector, and that will be for low tolerant users. They're not going to be able to handle something that's 20 or 30 milligrams. If they have that, they're going to have probably at least an uncomfortable feeling for a moment, or at least a feeling of paranoia or just discomfort. And if that happens for their first experience, then they're not going to be coming back. And then that's their perception of this industry. And I do think that that's something that always needs to be looked at. I would also hope that at other points, they start having multiple doses of their cans. So I think that there should be a 5, 10, 20, maybe up to 100 gram dosage for a lot of these drinks that should be available. That's probably a few years away, but I definitely think that this is an obvious sign of what's to come, where you're going to start seeing other beverage brands start realizing there's a lot of potential. I'm sure most of them will do what they've done so far, which is just go with the CBD approach. It seems much more socially acceptable. You can go with the health and wellness angle of it. But in general, I do think that even a lot of the brewery companies are going to start looking, especially in California, lots of microbrewers are now working with cannabis cultivators to have a THC or CBD infused non-alcoholic version of their beer. And I think that that's going to start translating into other markets. Nevada is probably going to start having a lot more beverages. And hopefully, eventually in Canada, they do change some of the strict regulations surrounding the production of these beverages so we can have a few more companies. I've talked a lot about my main favorite, which is Province Brands, who actually brews their beer directly from hemp. And again, the only reason you're not seeing their products on shelves is because of the difficulty that that company has with fitting into the current regulatory framework. Unfortunately, a lot of the language surrounding it can be very difficult for a company that's actually brewing hemp-infused beer versus having a beverage product that they're then just infusing with THC afterwards. But they're a company, again, that eventually will be on the market, and once companies like them come out, I think you're going to see a big change in the overall perception of the cannabis beverage industry. Moving forward to RAMM Pharma Corporation, who announced the company has commenced sales of its epifractan products through Peruvian pharmacies. Also announced on July 9th and 16, 2020, epifractan was approved and registered by Peru's Ministry of Health, or the Ministry de Salud, or the MINSA, becoming one of the only few cannabis products registered in the country. And both epifractan 2% and epifractan 5% have now been shipped to Peru for the sale through pharmacies and will be available to patients within the medical prescription. Now, RAMM also continues to scale up regular shipments of epifractan to Brazil under the country's compassionate use framework. Sales of our registered medical products through pharmacies is significant to expanding their accessibility to patients in new markets, stated Jack Burnett, the Chief Executive Officer of epifractan. Epifractan was approved and registered to Peru upon the completion of rigorous testing requirements and approval by MINSA to certify consistency, stability, and effective shelf life. And registered products are available at pharmacies as branded finished products and should not be confused with magistral formulas, which are prepared by a pharmacist on a case-by-case basis and have not received MINSA approval and registration. Currently, only very few cannabinoid products have been granted this MINSA registration in Peru. I've talked a lot about the Latin American markets before. Peru and Brazil are now starting to show up a little bit more often as far as companies entering into those markets. Again, as I've stated in the past, when you look at the Latin American market, I know a lot of people think that the regulatory framework surrounding cannabis is probably going to be pretty lax. It's actually quite high. And a lot of these companies and a lot of the reasons for this, of having these high standards, is because these countries are looking at international expansion and exportation immediately, as that's going to be their bread and butter, as they will have the best growing conditions and the ability to produce extremely low cost but extremely high quality crops that can then be sold out either as extract formulas or just hemp biomass, or again dried flower going to anywhere in the world. So it is going to be interesting to see which one of those next markets really sort of jumps up. Again, Colombia is really sort of the main player within the Latin American community. There's lots of talks about Brazil getting a little bit more opened up, and now Peru is becoming the next one talked about. It does seem to be that it's mainly the pharmaceutical entry into Peru so far. Obviously, again, with their MINSA regulations being quite strict and them not allowing a lot of cannabinoid-based products, it's going to be a limited market. But again, you're starting to see these markets grow and expand, and that leads into the next and last sort of discussion for the day, which is Medical Marijuana Incorporated, who announced today that Raul Elizad, the co-CEO and subsidiary of Hemp Meds, was featured in a global financial news outlet, Reuters, discussing the future of Mexico's legal cannabis industry. So obviously Latin America, one of the other areas that a lot of people are having a lot of discussions about, is next in lower North America, which is Mexico. On October 1st, Reuters article entitled "Mexico Plagued by Cartel Wars on the Cusp of the Legal Cannabis Green Rush" provided coverage on pending legislation in Mexico that would make the country legal for both medical and recreational use. And through Hemp Meds, this is listed as the article as a large player that is looking to get involved in these markets. And the company has been operating and selling high-quality CBD products there for the past 4 years, and for the first time is able to legally import CBD consumers in Mexico under the federal government import permit in 2016. We've made great progress in Latin America, specifically Mexico and Brazil, and they're excited to see how different Mexico's legal cannabis market looks in just a few short months, said Medical Marijuana Incorporated CEO Dr. Stuart Titus. We will continue to offer the highest quality products and look forward to finding new ways to expand our footprint and offerings in Mexico. According to the article, there may be some huge influx of large U.S. and Canadian cannabis companies breaking into Mexico's legal cannabis market, as well as local entrepreneurs who want to get involved. And though there is a long history of Mexico's drug cartel influence, with these new laws, the country would be able to fuel legal cannabis businesses selling in privately run sales and distribution centers. And I would highly recommend checking out that Reuters article, Mexico Plagued by Cartel Wars on the Cusp of Legal Cannabis Green Rush. There's a link attached in the article. He goes into a little bit more detail about some of the difficulties with the Mexican market in general. But that is sort of one of these big cash cow areas that a lot of people are looking at. The population of Mexico is massive. The grow potential and also the background, similarly to what we've seen in Canada, there's a lot of history of growing. Obviously, again, Mexico has a very tarnished history of their growing and their relationship with marijuana, especially from a U.S. to Mexico relations standpoint. But that still doesn't negate the fact that there's tons of talent within the Mexican community, especially when it comes to dealing with cannabis. And again, tons of more or less expensive labor, better growing conditions, lots of factors that can make this area a huge cannabis cash crop for lots of U.S. businesses, Canadian businesses, and Mexico startup businesses. But I do think it's going to be a very difficult and ugly sort of expansion of that market. To see it all actually get launched is going to be pretty aggressive in lots of ways. I think you're going to hear some pretty rough news coming out of Mexico, unfortunately. And I think a lot of these companies are going to go through a pretty aggressive learning curve when it comes to the difference of that market versus some of the other Latin American markets, or especially compared to the US and Canadian markets. But that's kind of much like what I've commented with Colombia. It's something that I think everyone should be rooting for if you're on board with the cannabis industry, as that's a country that has suffered immensely under cannabis regulations in the past, and a country that definitely deserves the win from the changes in regulations moving forward. That's all for today's podcast. And once again, today's podcast was sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corp, trading on the OTC as CSUI. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.